So I find it incredibly poignant to be talking to you today because, as you probably know, this is the anniversary of the Women's March. And I'm here to talk about creating community, especially when you can't find it. Because when you don't have a community, you have a choice. You can move somewhere where you think it exists, or you can stay and create it yourself. I grew up in a political family. That's my dad and stepmom. They went to the Women's March a year ago today. They traveled there on a bus from Tennessee to Washington to participate. So it's part of the fiber of my being that I talk about what I believe. I was raised in that kind of house. We talked about politics, not just about who was running for office or what was happening in our government, but about injustice, especially things like racism and sexism and how they become institutionalized. And when I was in middle school, I didn't know what that meant. And those things had to be explained to me, of course. But it was clear that this was going to be part of our conversations all the time. We weren't a family that worshiped football teams, don't get me wrong. My dad's a huge Gator fan. But that's not what we did. That we didn't have the family that said you don't talk about religion or politics. In fact, it was the opposite. You were expected to. And I knew that not only was it not okay just to be outraged, it was my civic duty to try to make a difference. So I was in high school in the 80s. You're welcome. And I went to school in St. Pete, Florida. And this group came to our high school one day and registered all of the seniors who were 18 to vote. I don't know if you guys do that here, but for me, it was really exciting. Most people, they weren't that excited. But I grew up in a house where my dad would get his jury notice in the mail, and he would talk to us about what a privilege it was to serve on the jury. When most people are trying to get out of jury duty, my dad would tell us about how excited he was to be able to participate in democracy. So that was in me. So I thought, I'm finally going to be able to vote. I'm going to be able to participate in democracy. So I register. It's in between classes, and we're all talking about what party we registered for. And I said, well, I registered Democrat. And it was like everything went black because there was a pack mentality almost no one else had. They had registered Republican. And I had a choice in that moment. Was I going to quiet down, maybe smooth over the discomfort that had occurred, or was I going to go ahead and tell them why I believed in those values? And I chose the latter. And it was curious to some people, because that's me in the middle. I fit most of the stereotypes for mainstream American. I'm white, middle class, I was a good student. I was captain of the cheerleaders. I was voted most involved in my high school. I was editor of the yearbook. I could go on and on. I enjoyed all these privileges just by accident of birth. And I was raised to be conscious of that. That it's my responsibility to talk about that it's easier for people like me. Fast forward through my adult life, and I'm continuing to be outspoken. I worked for a pro-choice lobbyist in DC in my 20s. I did a stint with AmeriCorps when I was 30. I was living my truth. It was normal. That was my normal. And then all of a sudden, I moved from all these progressive places I had lived, like Boulder and Asheville and Denver, to the northern suburbs of Atlanta. And I'd never lived in the suburbs. And I started looking for some examples of maybe people who shared my values. You know, bumper stickers that said evolve. I just wasn't seeing them. And I wasn't hearing a lot of dinner conversations about things that mattered to me. And I didn't know what to do. And I was getting quieter and quieter. And that was very unusual to be in your 40s and all of a sudden get quiet about your values that you've been living for decades. And I had many sort of mildly successful attempts at finding like-minded people over the 6 years that I lived here. Mostly because I would see that bumper sticker and grab that person in a very creepy way and ask them if they maybe wanted to have coffee sometime. As you can imagine, that's not the most successful way to build community. And so I was sitting at a soccer game for one of my kids, and a parent had moved here from Maine, which was another kind of shining object for me, that maybe she had different values than a lot of the people that I had been meeting around here. And she did. And so she introduced me to a group of people who had formed a secret Facebook group for liberal moms in the suburbs. And I was absolutely thrilled. I thought I was the only one. But the secret part was really important. And I thought so too. I didn't want my business affected. I was a little bit worried that my kids' social life would be affected if I were really open about what I believed in a culture that didn't seem to accept that. And then I realized not everybody can be secret. If you don't look like me and you wear your marginalized status by your skin color or by who you love, then you don't have a choice. And I was making a choice, and that's privilege. And that made me very uncomfortable. So I took a chance. And I asked these women if they wanted to not be secret. Because I had contemplated going back to Denver in 2015. I had just about given up on community. I couldn't find it. And that was very unusual for me because I'm extroverted. And I've never had a problem making friends. And I'd lived here for 6 years. And I really was having a hard time. And then we all went through something a little bit crazy together. And that was the presidential election for 2016. And no matter where you fall on the spectrum, we can all agree that it was different. You know, there were different rules, maybe no rules. And people started talking out loud to one another. And there was a narrative. And at least up here in these northern suburbs, the narrative was that you were going to vote for him and not her. Now, we didn't think we were going to change anyone's mind. That was not our goal. Our goal was to find each other and to let this community know that we are your neighbors too, that it's okay to have lots of different opinions. And so 200 people showed up on a Sunday on very busy corners of East Cobb. Every single one of us thought we were the only one, myself included. People were frightened to go, and once we got there, it was this incredibly electrifying feeling that not only were we not the only ones, people were pulling over with tears in their eyes, saying, I've lived here for 35 years and never thought I would see this. Thank you. How can I join? So it was an incredibly energizing experience. And important to us, again, not to change anyone's mind, but just to feel that we were together and that we didn't have to be silent anymore. It started with making signs and standing on street corners, but that was never going to be enough. So a few months later, I took to social media with some other people and formed a group called Pave It Blue. In 48 hours, we had 200 people join, just by word of mouth. And this is for women in Metro Atlanta only. In a month, we had 1,000. In 6 months, we had 4,000. We're going to celebrate our 1-year anniversary in March, and we've already passed the 5,000 mark. These were doers, not just talkers. That's one thing that made it different. There was a lot of angst, and there needed to be a channel. And we were providing something for people so that they could actually feel like they were doing something if they weren't happy about what was happening in the country. It happened to coincide with an incredible opportunity, a very visible congressional race, and I'm sure you all remember it, in the 6th District. It was a special election, and you have to remember that special elections, people barely pay attention, let alone national attention. And they were, because it was the first one after the presidential election, and everyone was watching to see how people were going to react. And we, through our support behind the progressive candidate. And that was an incredible opportunity for us because the resistance was happening across the country, but we could provide real-world examples, real time. And so we were very enthusiastic with our support. It was fun. We had some things that we could do with our anxiety and our fear and our pent-up energy. And we were so dedicated that that candidate often credited us publicly for running his campaign. It was an incredible opportunity. We were in the right time at the right place. Right place, right time. Scratch that, reverse it. And then the media came. And all of a sudden, I was on this straight learning curve, vertical. The New York Times, CNN, CBS, MSNBC, The Atlantic, The Guardian, so many I can barely even remember them, including international media. So France was calling, and Germany, and Japan. Japan! I was speaking to Japanese reporters. And interestingly, there was a campaign staffer who spoke some Japanese. We pulled her out. I mean, it was really surreal and exciting and terrifying. But I kept answering the call because I felt an enormous responsibility to my community, to this group, and to the candidate, because everyone was watching. And the other interesting part about the media is that usually you have to pay for that to grow a brand or a community. And we had what was called earned media, 4 months of PR that I never had to pick up the phone and call. And it was an incredible opportunity. And so that was a real interesting part about this, is that you answer the call so that they rely on you to make their deadline, and then when you need them, they'll answer your call. So that was a fascinating part of building this community. And what we found was they were interested in us because we were doers, and we didn't wait. And so this campaign was getting going, and they weren't ready to train us as canvassers, so we said, we'll train ourselves. We would hold them in our living rooms. They had hundreds of signs that needed to be delivered. They weren't ready. We said, we'll pick them up. We would gather and go put hundreds of signs across the district. And you know, this district is 3 counties. It's huge. And we realized we needed to make it fun. Because if you're going to ask somebody to participate at that level, you need to engage them in a way that they can see this as a trade-out of their regular social life will be their activist life, and that those two things now can be the same thing. And we met people where they were. Not everybody wants to canvass. It's exhausting. Not everyone can. Not everyone's physically able to knock on doors or is comfortable talking to people. So we allowed creativity to just bubble up and made sure that people felt emboldened to go ahead and wear it, literally. Social media was crucial. I know most people in this room, not everybody, but most people in this room have never lived in a world without it. But some of us have. And to imagine that you could amass that many people and get them all to go in one direction quickly without social media is unfathomable. So that was crucial. We operate mostly on Facebook, but we also use Twitter. And we used Twitter to engage the media and candidates and elected officials. And very quickly, we had over 1,000 Twitter followers. And like I said, you continue to build those relationships and trust with the media and members of the community. And with 5,000 people in a group, we also realized statistically, we have one and more than one of almost every profession across every industry. So we could engage people and get them to take ownership of this just by tapping them and saying, who's a marketer? 20 hands go up, right? Who loves to do spreadsheets? Can you organize this data for us? Somebody is a podcast producer. We don't have to go hire that person. They're already there. So that really helped people take ownership of this community too, and not just sit on the sidelines. They wanted to be involved and bring their talents. This is some of our podcast folks. And the ones that couldn't be the traditional canvassers, we said, take some postcards, write postcards, have postcard parties. If that's too much, sit on your couch and do it by yourself, because the point is to meet people where they are and give them lots of choices. There are lots of ways to be an activist, not just one way. And before we knew it, they were making stickers, giving them to us by the hundreds, and buttons, and really picked up the baton and ran with it. And it was so remarkable to see people who had been in such despair and fear that were now feeling that they could contribute and find each other as well. But what about when there were no campaigns? We needed to offer something else. That campaign ended. What were they going to do now? So we teach them how to advocate down at the Capitol, because here in Georgia it's called advocacy, not lobbying, but it means the same thing. We make sure they go to the local politicians' meetings, and so that they know us as constituents. We're holding them accountable. That woman in the middle is Lucy McBath. She is part of a national spokesperson for Moms Demand Action. She lives here. She came home to run. She's running for office now. She's a member of Pave It Blue. These are the kinds of things that were happening. Building coalitions with people who were doing important work, registering voters, nonpartisan organizations. It didn't matter about the side. We just wanted to make sure people were participating in democracy. And speaking out against injustice, making sure that the voting process is fair here in Georgia. Again, a nonpartisan issue. In this picture alone, and remember, we're less than a year old, and I didn't know anybody, and there was no community. This woman is one of the national vice chairs at the national level. A woman in the back works for Planned Parenthood. Another woman next to her is the executive director of the state House caucus. The gentleman in the back ran for office twice in Forsyth County. You all know the history of Forsyth County, right? This woman in the front was just elected to the state senate as a first-time candidate. Would it have been easier to go back to Denver? Yes, it would have. But what I helped grow, and the changes that I think I've made, and certainly the changes to my life, and hopefully the face of politics in Georgia, made it worth it. And I'm here to stay now. Thank you.